How's it going? In today's video, we're going to go through how you can actually lower your CPMs if you're having CPA inflation issues, and how you can increase performance when things are going on with Meta and it seems like there's something under the water. All right, so let's go ahead and get right into this. Awesome. So lately, Meta's been going through a little bit of turmoil. Things have been a little bit more difficult. A lot of folks have been having trouble scaling, having trouble getting things to work. So today we're going to go through that. And on the other side, we're also going to go through how you can actually reduce CPMs while keeping your other metrics the same and increasing ROAS and profitability and lifetime value over time. Okay, so we're going to go through all these things today and really talk about some ways to diagnose and test low CPMs or high CPMs and figure out where your best mix is, and also talk about ways to help Meta out. All right, so first and foremost, let's just talk about campaign structure in general. There's really only two types of campaigns we're going to be focusing on at this point in time. We're looking at ASC, right? And I'll zoom into this so you can see this a little bit better. ASC campaigns, right? This is a very popular campaign type. They work better for some brands than others. Typically, they're going to work well for mid AOV brands, usually brands that have a lot of competitors, and so there's a lot of awareness in the market. Typically, advantage shopping campaigns are going to act a little bit more like middle of funnel. They capture existing demand. They don't do a great job at really kind of creating that demand, but they capture existing demand very well. So again, if you're in a market where people are very aware of the products, there's a lot of competitors, there's not a lot of education that needs to happen on the ad side of things. ASCs will probably work top of funnel. For most people, ASCs work well more middle and lower funnel as far as nurturing people. So these are good to test. They're definitely the future, right? Meta is going to be really at one point a one-click advertising solution where you just click, let's go ahead and get started. And from there, it's going to use AI to create creative. It's going to scan your website to make copy. It's going to automatically use something like advantage shopping to show ads to people. So it's the future. It's important to get your feet wet with it and kind of get warmed up on advantage shopping if you haven't. But most brands, all those big boys are running it. All the small brands are running it, at least to some capacity, even if it's a low budget. So AFC, very popular. Next is like CBO, or what we would call a broad campaign, right? Broad just means changing age, gender is okay, location. Really, those are the broad constituents, not lookalikes, not interests, not custom CSVs. That would not be considered broad. So again, broad is also typically using ad set optimization or campaign level optimization just to let the platform decide how much to spend on the ads and just letting it kind of figure out what the best allocation is. This is the most popular. This is going to work for most brands. This is typically the best solution for CPMs, right? Lowest CPMs, typically the best performance on here. It's rare that you do see ASC outperforming CBO. It happens for sure. Usually, best performance is going to be on this. But for some brands, they do see better for performance on ASC. Usually top of funnel. But yeah, typically CBO is going to be there. Now the last kind of campaign type is going to be like a retargeting funnel, which might just be bottom of funnel, ATC, retargeting, something like visitors, something like this, 180-day add to cart retargeting, 180-day visitor retargeting. This is still a campaign type that can be used usually when you're trying to liquidate your funnel and really just flush it and or capitalize on like a high demand season, Black Friday, a sale season, etc. It will cost you future cash flows. So again, you're going to just be cashing out basically today instead of tomorrow by getting people that were probably going to buy in the future to buy today. So again, it's good if there's a reason for that, which seasonally there can be reasons for that, like I just explained. But this is really gonna be the last campaign type, which is really the only time you're gonna maybe upload a CSV or retarget a pixel audience. Those are typically the two ways. But in general, this is your core. I mean, this is it right here. I mean, it doesn't get much more simple than this. These are the key audiences that most brands are using. Okay, and of course, when we look at how these are actually being used, right? There's different structures where we have a CBO testing ad set, and maybe a CBO scaling ad set where you graduate your winners into a scaling ad set and have your winners compete so the testing ads can kind of spend against each other. That's a very, very common structure. A lot of big brands use that. Another is just testing by placement, so running reels and statics in their own campaigns or ad sets, depending if you're using ABO or CBO, letting those compete against each other. Same thing for ASC, testing ASC and a scaling ASC, very, very similar. So a lot of different structures here. But in general, what we're seeing right now, brands that are struggling from a high CPM, we recommend going for the CBO, okay? And not doing any bottom of funnel, not doing any ASC, not doing any like lookalikes or interest group targeting or anything like that. Typically CBO. If you are having CPM issues, that's going to be the best way. Also, when meta's fluctuating and getting a little weird, typically CBO is going to be the most stable campaign type at the moment compared to ASC. So for those reasons, it's usually the way to go. But again, a lot of brands do well with ASC, so you do need to test both. But I would say the edge is on CBO for usually lowest CPMs and still highest click-through, highest quality customers, with those CPMs, and typically the best performance when it comes to the net profit side of things, okay? So again, if you're struggling with that, would definitely recommend CBO. In times of turmoil, would definitely recommend CBO at the moment in terms of instead of ASC, which seems to get affected by things a little bit more, okay? So now let's talk a little bit about cost controls in times of turmoil. So cost controls, again, really depends on the brand. For high AOV, they might be more important. For brands with really sensitive financials, they might be more important. But in general, during times of turmoil, cost controls can make sense. But for a lot of brands, lowest cost will often be less affected. So lowest cost basically really the main issue here is it might spend when you have extremely high CPMs, but you can easily negate this with a rule, right? So for example, you can run lowest cost with a CPM rule and basically taking 1.5 to 2 standard deviations above your mean CPM for the last 30 days. Right, so you can update your rule every 30 days just depending on the market conditions, because CPM is very variable, seasonally especially. And so what we can actually do is we can create a rule, which is pretty easy. Just look up how to create a rule in Meta. We can create a rule for our lowest cost campaigns and actually go ahead and say, hey, if our CPM is 1.5 to 2 times our mean, our average CPM from the last 30 days. So you just have to go and look at your CPM for the last 30 days across the account. Take that as your average and then calculate a standard deviation. You could do a daily standard deviation or a weekly standard deviation for the last 30 days, and then just calculate that 1.5 times SDev or 2 times SDev. That's really simple to do in Google Sheets. Just look up how to calculate standard deviation, just one formula. But from there, you can actually create that rule and add it so it goes ahead and turns off your campaign in Meta if the CPMs are really shooting up. So this is a good way to do it. In order to negate a lot of that risk that can happen from a CPM increase or a CPM fluctuation. So you can put this on a campaign level and let that run. So this is a great thing to do during times of turmoil, adding in a CPM rule if you're running lowest cost. And again, for some brands, lowest cost works better. For some brands, we find that cost controls can work a little bit better, or maybe a generous cost control. When it comes to cost controls, the main issue is when things aren't working that well. The nice thing is usually cost controls really don't spend. Like they spend, if your cost controls often aren't spending a lot, they're gonna really not spend during times of turmoil. So I think it's really good to note that if you need to maintain a certain level of volume in order to make things work for the brand. So yeah, cost controls really won't spend during times of turmoil. And again, you might have to make them more generous to spend. And with a lot of people running cost controls on the platform, that means there's no one bidding. So the lowest cost people are actually going to be getting typically a little bit more volume than they would normally expect during these times. So again, whether you use cost controls of some kind or lowest cost depends what works for you normally. If cost controls work for you normally, maybe just test a little bit broader of a cost control, a little bit more generous of a CPA, however you have those oriented, maybe more generous bid. If you normally run lowest cost, that seems to be what works for you best. Again, and you are kind of struggling there, again, add a rule like this in order to kind of protect your downside, okay? Because again, cost controls are suggestions. They don't necessarily protect your downside. I've had cost controls overspend all the time. They don't hit our actual target for our bid or our CPA. And so it's like, okay, they're definitely a mere suggestion. They help, but they're not foolproof. The rules are a little bit more foolproof than cost controls, though nothing's 100% on any given platform, okay? So that's what I would look at. And again, if you're struggling with high CPMs, this rule wouldn't apply, but something you can test if you are really struggling with high CPMs on cost controls is, really that's not going to affect it, so really nothing. But if you are struggling with high CPMs on lowest cost, you can consider trying some cost controls just to see if that increases it further by selecting an even more qualified, expensive audience, or seeing if for some reason it reduces it, which we see in very rare cases. But again, if you're struggling with high CPMs, that could be another way to look at it, okay? So in terms of setup for the brand during kind of rough times on Meta, the main standard operating procedure that most brands should be following, and the successful ones typically do, is usually leaning CBO, leaning with a more generous cost control if that's what they normally run, leaning with lowest cost with a CPM rule if that's what you normally run, and actually going ahead and relaunching your key kind of evergreen campaigns, okay? So typically what that looks like is manually going in, creating a new CBO campaign for all your CBO campaigns, going in and recreating those ad sets, copying those post IDs over from your existing ads, and just setting those live new budgets and launching those, okay, alongside your running ads. Typically during times of more choppy performance, just doing that simple relaunch and that rebuild will get you through a lot and really help things out quite a bit. And as your old campaigns, maybe the performance decreases even more, you can just shift budget out of those old CBOs and into your new campaigns and kind of let those other ones die out and kind of keep reducing that budget down, pushing into your new campaigns until your old campaigns are at zero. So that's what it looks like. So again, the SOP is typically use existing cost structures and relaunch new CBOs preferably. So again, this is preferred, but if you do run ASC, you can rebuild your ASCs, but we typically lean CBO during turmoil or more choppy times on Meta, and go ahead and use CPM rule on lowest cost or a broader cost control, okay? So this is what we look at for times of turmoil. This is what I'd run, okay? Some other things you can do to help performance when things across the platform are just not going that well, other than a rule or a broader cost control to get things to spend a bit more. Just going ahead and adding in a fresh new offer and introducing new creative. Those things often do help. A fresh, exciting new offer, a product release, a special event, a live stream, a collaboration, these things do pull a ton of weight and they can get you back up. So again, those are going to have a massive effect across the account. Special events are huge. So if you can maybe have an offer waiting for times of turmoil, it's always good to have offer saved for rough times. We recommend doing this. It's actually great when you have assets already pre-built for this offer. We always recommend having 1 to 3 offers built on the back end, ready to be launched whenever something kind of goes downhill. So offer save for rough times, highly recommend running this guy. Collabs, special events, live streams, giveaways, whatever it may be. Run those. New SKUs if you have the ability to produce products quickly. If you're more of a drop shipping, print on demand type brand, again, that's going to really, really help you out. Okay. So really, again, the SOP, doing the duplicates, doing the copies. Again, we're not actually duplicating here. We have to rebuild manually, but we can copy those post IDs from the ads over to retain engagement. and then introduce a new offer, introduce a collab special venue, SKU, limited time, that kind of thing will do really, really well. Maybe a drop, just something exciting and engaging, okay? So that's what we'd recommend. Now, if you're a brand that is struggling with a higher CPM than you would come to expect, and you've talked to folks and they say, hey, we do not have that CPM, you should not be experiencing that high of CPM. Typically, there's a few reasons why CPMs are really, really high, and I'll list out really most of them in this video. So if you're struggling with CPMs, this is for you. We'll kind of start over a new section here because it's a little bit different. So one reason is, again, not on CBO, which we hinted at earlier. Again, CBO is just not doing interest targeting, lookalikes, custom CSVs, anything like that. It's just retaining targeting to and within the age, the demographic, as far as gender goes, and the location. That's basically CBO, location as in like per country. Those are the things you can change on CBO and letting the platform do the bidding when it comes to allocating budget on each individual ad and or ad set. So it's not on CBO is a huge, huge reason why brands have higher CPMs. We've seen brands switch from ASC, event shopping, to CBO, and what do we find? Typically a little higher return, typically a little bit lower CPM. So not on CBO. Using targeting is often a big one we see. So don't do that. Again, you have to pay a premium anytime you do targeting, and so that premium comes in the form of a higher CPM, okay? So that's a big one. Another one we see often is niche. Niche has a massive effect on the cost, right? So just like any market, the platform is made up of a bunch of niches. You have like apparel brands, you have luxury apparel, you have cheap apparel, you have nice cars, you have cheap cars. So there's this huge spectrum in every single niche. And so, of course, the big brands, the luxury brands, are going to be willing to spend more on a product and more on a customer than maybe a cheap brand. So if you are in a niche and maybe you're a premium brand or maybe you're a luxury brand, you're also going to be competing against even more luxury brands than you who can really afford to spend significantly more on a customer than you can. And a few niches we often see this in: supplements, health, home. These are big niches, and there's a lot of money in these. So if you're selling perhaps a protein bar and you have a really high CPM, oftentimes it's actually because you're being put in the supplement and health niche, like with people selling extremely expensive health services and extremely expensive health products, and so they can afford a way higher cost per acquisition than you can, and you're just being you're bidding for the same audience as them, and because they're willing to pay so much more for them because they have such an expensive product or service, you're the one getting kind of injured there as far as a very, very high CPM. So oftentimes the health, the home, supplement niche, there's other very obvious expensive niches. Even when you're just framing your product as more of a premium and luxury product, you have to understand, like, hey, who are my competitors? Am I bidding against someone who can afford to pay significantly more than I can? And therefore I'm kind of getting pushed out of the auction because they can just afford such a high CPM, and therefore my CPM is going up. So that's something to consider, is the niche you are in. That has a profound effect, okay? Another big one is seasonality affecting ROAS, again, or affecting CPM. And remember, CPM is cost per 1,000 impressions. There's actually a metric which I think is a little bit more indicative of like how much it costs to advertise to people on the platform, and that's cost per reach, cost per 1,000 people reached, right? Because a reach is a singular person, or a unique reach is a singular person. An impression is how many times that person has seen the ad. So you could have a reach of 1, so that one person saw your ad, but they had 3 impressions, so that one person saw your ad 3 times. And so when we look at CPM, we're always talking about cost per impression, but it's like you're paying for someone to see your ad multiple times, which adds in another layer of complexity. We really want to think about things in terms of CPMR, which is cost per mil on the reach side of things, so cost per 1,000 people reached. So just how much it would cost to show to one audience member, how much one audience member costs to reach. So again, something to consider there. But the seasonality side of things, we often see, of course, every December, every November, even October, end of October, last 2 weeks, last 3 weeks, things get a little crazy. CPMs get expensive. If you're selling a seasonal product, right? If you're selling sunglasses, swimsuits, beach stuff, around spring break, getting into summer, you're going to be bidding against everyone else doing that. It's higher seasonal demand. There's going to be more competition, significantly more supply, so you may have higher CPMs on the platform. Things like election years can also increase the CPM. You have huge political budgets inputting that spend, inputting that supply into the market, and so because there's so much more supply, things might get a little bit more expensive on your end because there's just less people to consume all those ads, right? So again, seasonality has a lot to do with it. And just be aware of what season you're advertising in, what the macro economy looks like, what the niche you're in, what that kind of season looks like. If there's a specific seasonality factor, that has a profound effect on CPMs as well. That can have a huge fluctuation. Okay, and just to show this to you a little bit more, we can look at average Facebook CPM by conversions. We can see, depending on the month and depending really on the year as well, that there's a big fluctuation, every December it peaks, etc., etc. Each month is very, very different, and years are different as they introduce more ad formats. There's typically quite a bit cheaper CPMs because there's more places to put the ads, right? And so with the introduction of Reels and some of these cheaper placements, CPMs have actually gone down, though the quality of the impressions may have also gone down as well, okay? So that's all very, very important. Seasonality, what's going on. Again, I'll just kind of add macro and micro here under that seasonality aspect, okay? Another huge aspect is going to be the creative, right? So a good way to see like how much your creative is affecting your CPM is to look at the creative or quality ranking and the engagement ranking. If it's below average, if it's near the bottom, it's very, very essential to observe that and see if it's something that you can improve upon. Because what often happens is you're not sure what's going on, and then you go ahead and check your creative and it's actually rated very, very low. And again, the goal of platforms like Facebook is to keep people on the platform as long as possible. The goal there is to retain people and create an amazing experience. In their ideal world, people are on the platform all day long, right? And so if your creative is creating a bad experience, meaning people don't engage with it, they don't like it, they don't comment on it, they don't share it, they don't direct message it to friends, they don't click on it. If people aren't interested in it, people are just scrolling past, it measures all those little things, how long people stay looking at it, if people swipe on it, all these different things. People don't engage with it, it's probably not a good creative, and therefore it's probably not creating a very good platform experience, and so maybe it's actually negatively impacting user retention on the platform, and so therefore you're going to get docked by it, and that's going to be reflected in your CPM increasing, or in reality your CPMR increasing, which increases CPM, and then from there your quality ranking will be lower and your engagement ranking will be lower. So creative having a high above average quality ranking and above average engagement ranking will mean that your CPM on your creative is probably as optimized as it can be for the most part, especially if you have a high conversion rate ranking, which we'll get into here in a second. That means that, hey, it's probably, if you have a high CPM, it's probably not a creative issue. But if you don't see those things, the above average rankings there, then it's probably somewhat affecting the creative a little bit, okay? Great. So then we have really website and post-purchase stuff. So Meta does scan your website. They look at H1 tags. They look at text on the site. There's some stuff around them looking at images as well, and kind of interpreting what images might be, maybe through the alt text. So they go through the website and they see what you're selling. So again, if your website talks in a lot of terminology around like health and supplements, again, you're probably gonna have a higher CPM, even if that's like not the niche you're in, just because you're kind of framing yourself as that product. So it kind of will pair you against the audience that it thinks you want. And if your website is indicative of a particular audience based off of the text on the website, based off of the images, alt text, all those different things, then again, you're going to be put against maybe more expensive competition than you would expect. So keep in mind your website copy, keep in mind your website images. These are things that can also increase CPM. Now, one thing to consider here too is if your ad is like not related to your site at all. Again, this has to do with creating a bad experience. So if you're directing to some completely different site than what is related to the ad content, then again, you're going to get docked on CPM. You're going to have a more expensive CPM because Meta needs to provide a good experience. And even if the offsite experience is poor with your website and it's like just not a good website, it loads slow, you have a high bounce rate, you have low average session duration. Meta doesn't know all of this, but it can get a feel for whether the website is indicative of quality. And so again, it to an extent can measure session duration and bounce rate. And so it wants people to stay on the site. It wants people to have a good site experience because it knows when people are looking at your ads that you are providing a good experience to them. And again, it will reward you for that with a lower CPM. So a lot of people miss that one, very important. Another one is post-purchase. So again, a lot of people don't think about their purchase experience, shipping times, customer service if needed. Again, Meta will ask people, how was buying from this brand? I've seen it myself before where they'll pop up a little thing that says, hey, how was your purchase from X brand? Would you rate it, 1 to 5 stars? Meta kind of has a feel for how a purchase actually went. So if you have slow shipping times, if the product's bad, that will eventually, though it might take a while, that will eventually reflect in your CPMs. If people don't like the products, poor reviews, etc., that's going to be reflected in your CPM. Meta knows, and you'll have a more expensive CPA. Okay, so again, these are all very, very important things to keep in mind when it comes to the CPM side of things. Okay, now there's a few other factors, and I think RevealBot here does a pretty decent job of how the CPM goes ahead and gets calculated. So again, we have optimizing consumer experience, which we mentioned, estimated action rates. So again, if you have a very low conversion rate on the site, this has to do with conversion rate ranking. Again, low conversion rate, indicative of maybe not the best customer experience, indicative of possibly an ad that is not correlated to the landing page and might be misleading. So again, very, very important to look at not only the ad conversion rate, like CTR, the click conversion, but also the purchase conversion. Those are all things that can have a little bit of an impact on there, okay? So once you go through this checklist and optimize all these elements, you should be seeing a little bit better CPMs, okay? And again, CPM isn't an end-all be-all. At a certain point, you can't really do anything about them. They just kind of are what they are. You're doing everything you can to reduce them, but you don't want to obsess over CPMs because again, they're relative, right? A more qualified audience is going to be more expensive and have a higher CPM, and therefore will probably have a higher click-through rate. A cheaper audience that might not be as targeted, might be not the right fit for your brand, may be cheaper, but will also have a lower click-through rate. The percent of people that see your ad from that audience will not click through to the website and potentially purchase as often. So one thing we really want to consider for CPMs here is your CPM to click-through rate or CPM to unique, I'm going to do UOTCR, unique outbound click-through rate, right? So if you're running Meta Shops, unique outbound click-through rate is only for websites. It's unique users that click out of the platform to your website. CTR is all clicks, so it can include some stuff that isn't shopping related, but it does a better job. And actually, we just want to do really either click-through rate or link clicks, but in general, just click-through rate will kind of count shops if you do run a lot of Meta Shops. So your ratio, if you have a higher CPM and a higher CTR, that can make sense. If you have a really high CPM and a really low CTR, typically more indicative of a creative issue. But again, they should be aligned. If one's higher, the other should probably be higher in general, just compared to your other ads and ad sets. If one's lower, if you have a low CPM, you should also typically have a lower CTR. And again, this just depends relative to your brand, what you see on average, but these are just things to keep in mind, okay? So typically what we notice is higher CPMs is usually a creative issue and a messaging issue on the creative and or the landing page. Those are usually the big problems. Typically people's products are pretty good, purchase experience is pretty good. We also do see that seasonality and macro and micro effects do have a huge effect during those extreme times like Black Friday. But usually it's going to be a creative issue with that messaging piece and not having those high quality rankings and providing not the best user experience. So the solution usually for this is just making a very entertaining creative. So what I mean by that is creative that actually isn't even really about the product necessarily, isn't even really about the brand necessarily, but somehow just creates and calls out your target market and entertains them, and provides them with either a funny, informational, or just like aesthetically pleasing, simply satisfying style video. And then you can kind of loop in your product in a creative way into that near the end. But if you're struggling with high CPMs, I recommend just not even worrying about selling your product, not focusing about the USPs or the features, just thinking about what your target market would find funny, what your target market would find informational, what your target market would find aesthetically pleasing. Think about these things and how you can literally provide that value, how you can give that to them through a video or through a photo or through a carousel. And if you can do that and create engagement, and that engagement will be proof that you've done that successfully, and your ad quality and engagement ranking will increase because of that. If you can do that successfully, then you should see your CPM start to decrease. And even if it doesn't increase ROAS, that's okay. You're on the right track if you know that now your CPMs are decreasing, okay? And then from there, it's just about doing a better job of intertwining your product into that entertaining factor, okay? So that's it for today. I hope this helps if you're struggling with high CPMs and or trying to figure out how to get things back on track after a more volatile time in Meta. There will be many more. So again, hope this is useful. Enjoy the rest of your day.